Well, hello, everybody. I'm Chris Graw, partner and senior wealth advisor with Carson Wealth. And today I've got a very special guest with me, former mentor and partner, Jim Anderson. And Jim, we met back in about 2005 or so when we started?
Sounds like right. Okay. 2004, 2005. It's been a while.
Kind of coming on 20 years or so here.
For sure.
So yeah. So aging us both, I guess, a little bit.
It seems that way. Exactly.
Yeah, very good. So, well, hey, Jim, first off, tell us a little bit about your professional background and just kind of how you got started, in the investment business.
Sure. Well, I've always been a numbers guy. I was an accounting major in college, and so worked at the CPA firm here in town for a few years, and so I'm a CPA, and then moved into the financial services industry, back in the day, the savings and loan business for years, rotated into the retirement plan, 401k business, and then the last 20 years or so really specifically directed to investment management and working with clients and their retirement plans, their retirement resources in that.
Yeah, that's great. And you got a few new titles now, right? Retired, grandpa, father, husband.
There are a number of roles. You're a husband, you're a father, a grandfather, and assorted other things. But no, it's an interesting role, and we're enjoying it.
Yeah, that's great. So. Well, one of the things we do, we work with a lot of people in what we call the sandwich generation. And that's just where you're still working, you're taking care of kids still, and you've got parents who are aging. So I was just kind of curious about your experience with that, and what you learned through that process.
Well, I think back to when my mom was in a retirement home, and obviously I was younger and working, and we'd go and visit her, and she would say, well, tell us about your week. And so my wife and I would just sort of share what went on during that week. And I remember my mom's response is always, oh, Ma, you are so busy. Well, it didn't seem so busy. That's just kind of what our life was.
Yeah.
Well, fast forward now, and Patty, my wife, and I are retired, and we've got 4 daughters, and most of them have kids, and they tell us what their week's like, and I say, Mike, you're so busy. And so, the reality is during that time, you are busy. You have a lot going on, but you do have certain priorities. You do have sort of a plan of what you'd like to get done, and may try and maintain some balance, but you do tend to get pulled in multiple directions. And so that's just kind of that season that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't do it all, right? So
no, you can't.
Pick what you want, pick what's the most important.
Exactly right.
Any other thoughts or advice for those going through that today? Well, like me?
Yeah, that's it. I've given a number of talks over the years, and one of the things about putting a talk together is, well, what are you going to say? Well, start with the end in mind. What do you want to communicate? Well, the same thing is kind of true in life.
Yeah.
What's really important? What matters? So what would you like to accomplish? And then work backwards. And so even as it relates to managing busy schedules and kids' activities and whatnot, try and focus on that so you don't get caught up in just the things that are urgent that need to be done that aren't all that important. But balance is, I think, a word I tend to use a lot, because I think you need to maintain balance so you're in some ways living your life intentionally, even if you're very busy.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. So thanks for sharing that. So, there's a few what I call Jimisms that I took away from us doing a lot of work together over the years. And I'm sure, some of even your old clients will be seeing this video, which I'm sure will be fun for them to see. But, you always used to say this, and I heard it repeatedly in client meetings, but it's so important to retire to something, not from something. And I've carried that on, and I use that today with clients as they're going into retirement. So can you kind of expand on that, what that means to you and why that's so important?
Sure. I think that came from having some clients say, I'm just sick and tired of the job I'm doing. I can hardly wait till I'm retired. And so they really were retiring from something, not necessarily to. And what I found was, in many cases, if they were doing was escaping their work world they didn't like, it wasn't very fulfilling. It wasn't very satisfying. And so, I think what's the 5th season in Cedar Rapids, Time to Enjoy or something, retiring to something. And for retirees, a time to enjoy that season is significant, But I think most would say even just enjoyment, sort of isn't always as fulfilling. And so I think retiring to something may be a hobby. It may be in some way serving other people. I golf with some guys, and one guy's kids are growing and the grandkids are out of town, and so he's gotten very invested in the school where his kids went. Another one, he and his wife go to Texas each year and for 2 months, and they go to a college where there are about 100 volunteers who come and help things on the campus, whether it's repair work or construction. Another friend drives a senior citizen bus around. So I think finding something that you enjoy, interacting with people, but something that's maybe serving, I think is retiring to something and not just escaping from something you didn't like.
Yeah, that's great advice. Almost a higher calling, a higher purpose than, I always thought like just thinking about, today and where I'm at, I'm going to be 44 next month. It seems like a grind some days, and some days you just come home and you're just like, boy, I'm going to be the greatest retired guy on planet Earth because, I can just go do whatever I want every day. But that kind of gets old, after a while, just not having purpose or something to be fulfilled with. So,
right.
Or helping other people. So, no, that's great. Yeah. And how did you kind of manage that as you were thinking about retirement? What were thoughts going through your mind as far as, what you were going to be retiring to?
Yeah, I think in my individual situation, a few things came together. My age was sort of 55, 60, moving past 60 was there. There were changes going in the business that I was involved in. There's a relationship that you and I had that was very strong, and you're interested in taking over my clients. And so there was a sequence there that just seemed to make it the right time.
Yeah.
And so, I could say, God's hand sort of provided that. But one of the things that was very helpful to me was I really transitioned my retirement. I went from 5 days a week to 4 days a week to a few hours a week to eventually you asking me, is it okay if we use your office when you're not there? And I said, well, that's fine. And then eventually I got there, my name wasn't on the door. And I realized, I guess I'm retired now. But that phased in allowed me to transition into retirement. I think it'd be frankly much more difficult for someone who works 30, 40 years at a business full time, and then on Tuesday they're gone.
Yeah.
And so the phase helped me, but I think the same philosophy of retiring to something and being able to maintain some of the interests and activities that I had make that transition easier.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I kind of forgot about the name on the door. So I think I did ask you though about that.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure it was fine with me.
You were very gracious and I think fine with it.
You didn't change the door lock.
Right. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we talk to clients a lot about that transition time, right? And, I think on one hand, they always... They do kind of tend to think financially sometimes about, well, why would I go down to 3 days a week or maybe go work, at the, garden center where I'm passionate about that, I'm not making any money, but it's almost not about the money, right? It's more about just kind of a gradual transition into a life where you truly have, freedom every day to, do what you want to do with your time. So
yeah, that's true. And frankly, for some people, it is about the money.
Yeah,
that they do need to supplement their retirement income. But for others, it's either starting a second career or doing something that they enjoy. And what I found is the level of busyness hasn't evaporated. It's still busy, but it's a different busy.
Yeah.
You don't have the same pressures of the job. And so even if you're volunteering or if you're working a second job more for the interaction with others, there's not quite the same pressure that there is in the, probably our pre-retirement world.
Yeah, stress is a little bit different.
Exactly.
But you bring up a good point because sometimes it is financial, and boy, it really helps a financial plan when you can push off just withdrawing from, say, your IRAs, 401ks, or investment assets, a little bit later, especially if you're looking at a earlier retirement, meaning maybe your early 60s or even 65, delaying that until later 60s or even age 70 can really be impactful from a financial planning standpoint.
No, you're right. And we were just talking earlier about the extended life expectancies that frankly is more common, and particularly if you're a couple, one of the two living to 90, 95, 100, and that does tax resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's interesting as we talk to people about life expectancy and kind of the, what we'll call the average age of how long people live. But averages are funny, right? Numbers are funny. So that means half are passing away before then and half are living, after then. And so, being prepared for a much longer retirement and making sure your money is prepared for that is really important. So
I think that's one of the biggest challenges financially is you don't know what that duration is. And so that's why you sort of need to use a financial advisor to run some projections using different scenarios to begin to see, well, what would it look like if and that? And, so there are a number of things that go into that, but you're exactly right. The uncertainty of what that retirement period is going to look like impacts how we use the resources that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fluid plan, ever changing, evolving, right? And so, things change and we need to make tweaks or update things, sometimes it's a expense that comes into play. Sometimes it's a windfall, whether it's an inheritance or, whatnot, that can change perspectives on things and, make sure you update your plan on a regular basis. So,
right.
No, that's great. Well, thanks for that. I was just kind of curious. We've talked about this over coffee before about, kind of the thought of what would I do different in, if I was going into retirement or, I had these expectations going into retirement. Just kind of curious if you could expand on, what were your expectations met, now that you've been in retirement for a while, or what kind of surprised you or maybe caught you off guard a little bit?
Yeah. Again, every situation is different and it's hard to generalize, but in our situation, the retirement transition has been very good and we've been able to maintain what we wanted to do. And I do get asked, what do you do with all your time? And I always say, every day's a Saturday. Well, that's not true. Yeah. But the simple answer is kind of a third. And we're blessed with 14 grandkids.
Wow.
And so, arguably a third of our time is spent interacting with them. We have about a third of those are in town, and so we do a little more involvement with them day to day. Others are further away, so we go visit them more often. And so, there is more family interaction there. But then I also have been involved quite heavily in our church over the years and a couple other ministries, and that's continued and allowed me the flexibility to maintain that. Yeah. And so that's a third roughly. And then a final third is my golf game's probably a little better. And we've traveled a little bit more. And so, kind of like when you work, there are times where one of those thirds takes on much more significance and time than the others. But those are the three general activities. And so we've been able to maintain those and develop those over the years that we've been retired. So there's not been any great surprises. I think one of the things is just the unexpected. Like you said, whether it's a windfall, which we haven't seen that yet, but
sure.
But certainly things come up, and sometimes it's financial, and sometimes it's health, and so I know I've got a good friend who's into the retirement years and has health challenges and has a loss of a spouse. And he said, Jim, the golden years aren't as golden as I thought they'd be. Yeah. And I think that's the reality is that we don't know what's going to be in the future. And so you sort of need to have that element of flexibility, being able to adapt and not only know where you stand financially, but also as it just relates to your whole life experience and that. Yeah.
No, I think that's great advice. And, kind of what you're saying is just having more of an open mind when it comes to, what retirement is going to be like. It could go exactly as you think it's going to go, but it may not, right? And so just kind of having to navigate through that,
Yeah, that's true. I think back to my parents, and they retired probably like me, early 60s. And the first 10 years, they were just very active and traveled and did different things. And so their living expenses weren't all that different than they were before retirement. Well, then the next 10 years, early 70s to early 80s, well, their travel was less, their outside activities were less. And then the last 10 years, they kind of went from the TV room to the bathroom to the kitchen, And so, there's sometimes when you look at the financial needs that you have, there's some stages, and in one sense, they may reduce as your activities reduce. On the other hand, they may go up as your living expenses, if you need more medical care, go up, so there's, again, the advisability of meeting with an advisor to sort of lay out different scenarios to just be able to adapt regardless of what situations come. And so that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of something you used to say too. I think I got this from you, but you've got your go-go years, slow go years and your no go years, right?
If I didn't say that, I should have.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think I got that from you actually, but yeah, when we're doing planning for people, there's these different phases to your retirement that happen, and I think it's important for people to enjoy their wealth that they've worked so hard to accumulate. So doing some things while you're healthy and able, is important, especially as we think of how we were talking about how life expectancy and just how long we need to plan for. So.
Yeah, that's true. We've talked about, well, what are the elements? Well, the elements are, spending and having saved. What do you have and how do you spend it? And when it comes to saving, we'd always use this simple illustration of which is more, $1 million or a penny doubled every day for a month.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Even in February, that's more than $1 million. And so you really hope for a 31-day month, But the fact is, it just illustrates the principle of compounded earnings and why it's so important to start saving early.
Yeah.
Because if you wait till I'm going to retire in 3 years, it's tough to accumulate resources. And so, we kind of are left with what we have. Either the flows of Social Security, or if there's a pension, or if there's some annuities that kick in, and then the pot. And the pot is 401k or IRA or whatever other resources I have. And that's that's sort of what we have to use over now till we leave this world. Well, then standard of living is sort of the variable, is what's my spend rate? And I think whether you're working or retired, you have to live within your means. And so sometimes that means I either have to increase my inflow, which if I'm retired may mean having a part-time job to supplement my earnings, or it means I need to adjust sometimes downward my spending. And I think you can have a plan and you can have a budget for some. That's probably a little bit above my pay grade, but it's having some sort of structure. But there needs to be an element for the unexpected, for the contingencies that arise. Because that's probably one of the things I've noticed financially is that you sort of have an idea of what your expenses are going to be. But just like every other year, boy, I hadn't planned on this, hadn't thought of that. And the exceptional becomes the norm over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And to all our listeners, do the math, $1 million today versus a penny doubling every day for an entire month. So kind of staggering math.
It is. I double checked it, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure the penny is better, right?
That's
Doubling
it.
every day.
That's it.
So, what you don't have to give specifics around numbers, but what are some of the things you did, you and Patty did to prepare for retirement financially? What were the things that really kind of made you feel like, hey, we can do this and be successful with it, and going into retirement with confidence? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a little bit how you live your life. And I guess in our perspective, we sort of took the perspective, we aren't sure what's going to happen. And so frankly, insurance played a big role, because you don't know you're going to live to be 103. You may not live to be 53, and so we had some life insurance. We had some term that was sort of the death insurance so that if we died, there was a payout. And if you didn't, then you didn't have it. We had some whole life. And so it has some cash value that's there. We also really thought in terms, or maybe I thought more than my wife thought, who would nod her head and say, oh, good. But we talked in terms of things we've said is it's nice if you can have flow of income that covers your real living expenses, the necessities in particular. And so for us, the flow is really pretty much the Social Security that each of us are drawing. And then we have an annuity that'll kick in when we start drawing on that. And so that's the base that hopefully covers the living expenses that continues. And then, like you had said earlier, if you can defer drawing on your IRA until a little bit later, that's great. Well, then the IRA dollars and what we draw out of that is really what we then would use to supplement the flow and to do the more discretionary spending, whether it's the travel or acquisitions or whatever that's there. But, it's a little bit's on the income side. Obviously, contributing to the IRAs and the 401ks was probably the biggest investment thing we did to try and accumulate some dollars. But it's also monitoring the spending on the backside. And so if you're spending everything you're making while you're working, you're not going to have it later. And so it's, again, that word I use, trying to have a balance. Enjoying what you have, but also not ignoring the future post-retirement.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And, today's, and it's been going on for quite some time, where pensions are not necessarily a thing very much. There's a few employers in the area and throughout the United States that still do that, but it's a lot more market based for a lot of clients, and they don't have those guaranteed incomes outside of Social Security. So I think that's important to think about, is how do you create guaranteed income to cover your basic living expenses month to month, and make sure you don't have to rely on the ups and downs of the of the stock market, and whether you do that through annuities or bonds or real estate, or there's a lot of ways to do that, but that's good advice. So
yeah, I think it's one thing to sort of evaluate, do I have enough to retire on today? But over time, that inflation word comes in.
Yeah.
And we've been in a period of, as low inflation that now has gone up. And I just saw this headline in the news today about 1 in 4 U.S. adults, 50 and older, who aren't yet retired, expect to never retire. Just because of the inability to accumulate sufficient assets, or the realization that they aren't going to last as long. Because then in the fine print, it said 70% total retired and pre-retired ones are concerned that the inflation in the prices is exceeding the increase in their income. And that's a reality that, we all know what is happening to the cost of certain commodities and whatnot. And so over time, that can be a very big factor. And I think there too, the financial advisor can help give some structure into, you certainly want to know what's your risk tolerance. How much risk do I want to take? What are my retirement goals? And that may shift to more preserving than accumulating, but really help me through how to diversify to achieve my goals, both income-wise as well as longevity-wise. And so that's where I think, again, you play such a key role in helping us know where are we on that.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. You've been retired for, you transitioned, so I wasn't exactly sure on how to say, how many years you've been retired, but safe to say maybe 5 to 7 or so, something like that.
That's right.
Yeah. And have you had any new thoughts on just retirement planning or financial planning in general as you've kind of gotten deeper into retirement?
I think I go back to what I said earlier. Philosophically, you just need to be flexible.
Yeah.
You need to have a plan. It's good to plan, but there's a proverb. It's in the Bible, actually, and it says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines the steps. And that's the reality, is that we can have plans that just are rock solid in our minds, but probably as I've now in my 70s, I just have a lot of people that are having health issues. I have a lot of friends who've passed away or lost a spouse, and you just realize, health is something you can't take for granted, and likewise resources. I know a family where they're potentially considering moving into assisted living, don't have any long-term care insurance, and so they're looking at, easily $8,000 to $10,000 a month. Well, that's significant dollars no matter how much you have in resources. So I think, one is just realizing you need to be flexible in what you do financially. I think beyond that is more the perspective of what are you retiring to? Yeah, you really do want to enjoy it. You really do want to take advantage of the opportunity you have to have more discretionary time, both for yourself, but also hopefully to maybe help some others that are there.
Yeah.
But then there's also just our attitude, and some of the most cheerful, enjoyable people I know don't have good health. And some of the grumpiest people are the ones who have great health and maybe complain because their golf game is not very good. And I can be one of those, And so I think, attitude means everything.
Yeah.
And whether you're talking adjusting into retirement or being in those sandwich years where you're busier than scat, they tend to be what we make of them.
Yeah. Just being grateful is important, right?
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Very good. Any other advice you'd give to someone thinking about retirement today? I mean, we're meeting with folks all the time who are evaluating, do they have enough to retire? Do they want to retire? All these things we're talking about. Anything else you would mention?
No, but I think packaging it. I think sometimes, and again, I was in the business, you can get too close to it yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the advantage of, you and I have worked together a long time, and you helped me with my investments as well, is that you have a little more of a objective perspective.
Yeah.
I can get just even too tight, even though I understand the markets and the finances. So it's helpful, and I know, not that long ago, Patty and I met with you, and you ran some illustrations that were just helpful to us to sort of visualize where we are. I think the other thing that I would say for couples, and not every couple is the same, but in our situation, I'm the numbers guy. I enjoy paying bills. I enjoy doing my, financial type things.
Spreadsheets.
Patty says, "Why in the world are you doing that?" And she's a wonderful, smart gal.
Yeah.
But finances isn't her interest.
Yeah.
And so we've worked, and this is maybe a topic for another discussion, is how do you sort of prepare for when there's only one of you? What is it that I know that she should know? What is it that she knows that I should know? And so I think even as you enter retirement, if you're a couple, it's a joint thing, and so how's this going to impact each of you together as well as individually? And so I would have some more discussions from that vantage point as far as what are we going to do and what would you like to do? So it's not just all about me. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it's, we used to talk about this when we were working together, is just getting the non-financial spouse in the room. And it's not to necessarily understand all the numbers, right? But a big part of it is just building a relationship so that if something does happen, they know the person they're calling that can help them walk through the steps that they need to take to, take care of the financials. And not having that burden or not having to worry about that and knowing that there's a plan can relieve a lot of stress for the surviving spouse, if something, God forbid, happens. So.
Oh, no, and that's, I would say, and we, would try and promote that.
Yeah.
But I think that's so true, that relationship that goes beyond just the numbers, but knowing that you genuinely care about the individual and what's best for them, so that if one is gone, particularly if the financial party is gone, it's the non-financial, they know they can come to you and that you'll guide them. We're in a consistent track with where you've been before, and not doing it for them, but doing it with them.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for them to know as well.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Jim, this has been really fun. Thanks for doing this with us, and thanks for all your mentorship. And, I've learned so much from you, so look forward to continuing our relationship in the future. And thanks for being here.
Oh, well, this has been fun. And obviously, I value our relationship and appreciate what you've done. So thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
Bye.